Okay, we'll start the session today. So, so far we have covered uh, some of the examples of REST APIs, and we have covered the major REST API examples, and we'll see few REST APIs, and then we are yet to see validations in our project, and also we are yet to see exception handling in our project. Also we need to cover topics like profiling. How do you use different environments, and how do you work when you have different environments and you got to point to different property files. So we'll see those things, and once that is done, uh, uh, we'll be writing some test cases to see how we can write JUnit test cases. So we'll start with a few more APIs. So let's say you have some requirement, means we were working on this employee management feature. So as of now we have seen how you can create an employee record, how you can fetch all the employees, and how you can fetch a particular employee detail, given that your requirement is you need to fetch the details by the employee ID, and also how you can remove an employee from the organization. So let's say now we want to modify the details. Now let's say that we want that some details of the employee get modified. How do you go for modifying, and what are the parameters that you think will be required for modifying the details of the employee? So think about this, modifying an employee detail is means making some adjustments to the existing DTO, that is your data transfer object. So let's say you have an employee record in the database, and as of now we have seen that the employee record has three fields in the database. We have employee ID, employee name, and we have the employee age. So now when we think of modifying the employee detail, so when the requirement comes in to modify the employee detail, how do you go for building the API contract? So you know that if you need to modify the employee detail, that must be an existing employee, and in REST terminology we call that as a resource. So whatever resource is existing, we need to modify that particular existing record. So how do we do that in REST? We basically use the Spring REST put API, right? So we have one put API, and we'll use that put API to modify the details of the employee. So we'll see how we can go ahead. So for that, what are the things that you would be requiring? So one thing is, when you build your API contract about this, you would definitely need the ID, because you should not be building the API contract that you are updating with the help of name. Means I whenever you write your REST APIs, most of the times you should be having some kind of unique identifier to uh, hit your APIs. That will ensure, because if you modify it with the, if you search with the name and try to modify, there might be duplicate records, there might be some other employees records which you don't want to modify. So that's why you will need the employee ID, and also the payload, the new payload which you are going to which you want for the existing employee. Let's say our requirement is that we will modify the age of the employee. So what are the things we'll do? We will require the age, we will require the employee ID, and we will require the employee age, and we will pass the request to the uh, controller in the form of, let's say we can pass the request in the form of a path variable, and that ID can be passed as a path variable, and we will take the age in the form of uh, the a request body. We have the employee DTO already created, the data transfer object, right? We will utilize that. So let me try to build this REST API. So it would be a put mapping, and we will provide the API contract. So the, let's say the URL is something like this, employee slash, and we will put a placeholder. This placeholder will be replaced by the path variable. We will see how we do this. We have already done this in delete mapping in the when we wanted to remove an employee from the organization. So we will utilize the same concept, and we will write down our controller method. So the return type would be a response entity, and let's say if we name this as modify employee details. And to resolve this path variable, we have seen that in the previous example also we have taken this path variable annotation, right? To resolve this placeholder, we will again utilize the same. So let's try to utilize the same. Let's keep a path variable, and the value would be, the value will be exactly the same whatever we have provided to the placeholder in the URL. So we will provide ID, and once we provide the ID, we need to provide a variable which will hold this value. So let's say this is like ID, and then we have to pass a request body, and we will take this employee class reference. So let's try to build this API. Now again, it would be the same thing that we would be calling our service layer. So for calling the service layer, we have this uh, employee service which is like injected into our controller. So we will try to utilize this. So what type of injection is this? This is a property level dependency injection. So far we have seen like all the three usage of dependency injection. Like this is an example of property level dependency injection, and here in the service layer we have seen how this is a constructor level dependency injection, and in the DAW layer we saw that we had setter level dependency injection. That is, we were utilizing a setter method for injecting our dependency. So these are the three ways in which you can like inject your dependency. We have already seen this, and now we'll build this API. So let's say we want to modify the employee details. So employee service dot modify employee details, and we will need to pass the two values like ID and let's say employee object. And for now we don't have this created. We do not have the method in the service layer created, so we will have to create it. So let's suppose we have, if our object is modified successfully, what we do is we will return a status code of okay, http status code dot okay. So this would be our API contract. This would be the structure of our API. Now what we are going to do is we are going to write down our service layer. So in the service layer, we will have to create this method, modify employee details. So let's go ahead and try to create this. So if you hover over it, you will get this error that this method is not resolvable, means it is not there until now, and you will have to create the method. So you can just go over it and click on this. It will create this method for you. The editor will create the method for you. And once this method is created in this interface, this is our interface, right? So there must be some class which is implementing this interface. So that class has to provide the implementation for this abstract method. So that is what interface and class contract is, right? So sometimes an interviewer might ask you what is the contract between an interface and a class. So you will basically have to say that the interface basically contains the abstract methods which have just the prototype or the method signature, and there is a class which implements that particular interface. So that class has to definitely provide the implementation of this abstract methods in the interface. So as of now, this modify employee details method is not available in this service layer, in this employee service IMPL, and we are implementing this interface. So the editor will give me an error that either you declare this class as abstract or implement this method. But if we declare our class as abstract, we are not going to like create and we are not going to like auto wire this, or we are not going to like utilize this. So we'll have to implement this method, and once we implement this method, we have got our basic structure of this method. So let's go ahead and try to write some code in this method. So we know that we'll have to like interact with the data layer now. So let's put down some logs as well. Just a second. Okay. Okay. So we'll write down some log statements here. Logger.info. Let's write down updating employee details. When you build your project in any organization, you should only write the relevant logs. Means irrelevant logs you should not keep in your project. That like makes the code look cluttered, and there's like lot of logs. If there are like unnecessary lot of logs, that can like slow down your application as well. So it's only means you have to keep logs, because in case of like failure of the application, if there is some issue, you need to trace the logs. So logs are necessary, but try to like keep only the relevant logs. So now our service layer needs to communicate with the data layer. So what we'll do, we will utilize this employee DAO. So this employee DAO basically is uh, an interface of the data layer. So we'll try to like utilize this. So employee DAO dot update. Let's say we want to update the employee age. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and try to create a method like update employee age, and okay, update employee age. So in that case, what we'll do is we'll pass this ID, sorry, this ID and the employee employee object. So this method is still not there in the data layer. So we'll go ahead and try to create this. Anyone having issues in following this? We have seen this like in the previous APIs as well. So I think it should be fine, but you can like ask any questions if you have as of now. So I'll go ahead and try to create this method in the DAW layer, and we have the prototype of the DAW layer created, and we'll have to now provide the definition to this in the DAW IMPL. So this DAW IMPL still does not have the implementation of this method. The method that is there in the interface, we'll have to provide the definition for that particular method. So we'll go ahead and try to click on this. We'll click on implement methods. See, it's the same thing at the service layer or at the DAW layer. We are doing the same thing. In the interface, we are basically creating the signature of the method, and in the implementation class, we are providing the implementation. So that is why we have like named the package as well similar to that. Like if you see the package structure, it is like IMPL, means there's a convention, naming convention, IMPL. That means this is an implementation class. Yeah, TJ, that is fine. Means I got why we are passing the ID, but we'll keep this ID as mandatory in the employee class. We might not even pass the entire object. Means we let's say the employee contains ID, name, and age. For now, we want to just pass the age. So what we'll do, we will not pass the other two things like id and name, because for then we'll need to like modify both the things. Means there would be some ambiguity what we are trying to like modify. Let's say we can just pass whatever we need to modify in that employee uh, request body. So we'll not pass the other fields. We'll just pass the age which we need to modify. So that is why id we definitely need to pass, because that is a unique identifier, and with we will try to write the queries. If you try to like pass any other field in the path variable, that will again cause ambiguity, because names can be duplicates, age can be duplicate. Means there can be different employees as well having the same name. So we'll pass this id. Okay, so now this dollar has to implement this method. So let's try to go ahead and try to provide the implementation for this method. So we have this update employee age. So this is which type of query we'll be writing. We'll be writing an update query. So far I'm not sure like how many people are like aware of like SQL queries, but see, I've shown you like how we can like write, how we can like create a table, right? So creating a table is something like this. This is the this is the way in which you create the table, and you basically use create table employee and then pass the fields which you need to create. You need to provide the data type also, and when you want to basically select anything, then you can do a query like select star from employee. Select star basically helps you select everything, but if you want to like select particular fields, you have to provide those particular fields. Similarly, we have seen how we can insert data in a insert data into a particular table. So this is the query like insert into, you will have to provide the table name and id, name, and age. So these are the three fields which you want to provide values, and these values like this question mark, these are like placeholders. This we will be passing dynamically at runtime. So in when you write it in your SQL client, what you can do something, insert into employee id, name, and age values, you can just provide the values. I'll show you the example. I think we have done something like this, or yeah, this is like one of the examples. You can write a query like this. Now in this case, we had also seen the delete query, right, where we can delete. So one more important catch: do not just forget the where condition while writing a delete clause. If you just do something like delete from employee and you do not write the where condition, now what happens if I pass this where clause like where id equal to, let's say, 123, so only that particular record will be deleted. A lot of times means when people are like beginners in SQL, writing SQL queries, what they do, they forget to like pass this where clause. So if you just write down delete from employee, it will wipe off the entire data in that particular table. So do not do that, do this, you will end up losing all your data. So this is an important catch, you need to provide the where condition. Now let's try to go ahead and write the SQL query for this. So how our SQL query would look like? It would look something like this. String query is equal to, we'll need to use update query. So how we basically write our update query is update employee. Employee is our table name, and then what we'll do, we need to use set keyword. So set, which field are we trying to update, which field we are basically trying to update. So we are trying to update the employee age. So what we'll try to do is set age is equal to something, this placeholder must be resolved, and where id is equal to something. So we'll pass this age and id now to this query. And how we'll pass, we have seen that we utilize the help of this JDBC template. And try to let's try to pass the parameters to this JDBC template. So it will be JDBC template dot update. So as of now we have used like different JDBC methods, like JDBC template dot query for querying all the records of the employees, JDBC template to dot query for object if you want to query for a single object, and for rest of the things like insertion, deletion, or updation, we are using JDBC dot template dot update. So we will pass this query, and then we'll have to pass. See, now we have two fields to pass here. We have two fields to pass here. So first field is the age. So we'll need to first provide the age. And how we can get the age is we'll utilize the getter method of employee. So employee dot get age. And second parameter is we need to resolve this question mark, and this question mark is basically for the id, so we will pass the id over here. Now once we are done with this method basically returns as an integer value. So that integer value is basically, let's say we have run this query, and h- how many tables, how many records are there which got updated, it returns that particular value. So let's write something like this: integer rows updated. So this will be basically the number of rows which will be updated once you run this query. So let's write down some logger here, some logs. We'll try to like print out like number of rows updated, and this is it. Okay, why our this is like giving some error? Okay, we don't have to provide this. I think we should be good. We have written our query and we have written the all the methods like service layer methods, controller methods, and the DAW layer method for interacting. Let's see if we are able to execute this. Let's try to run our application. So our application has started, and let's try to hit this API. Okay, so let's try to first see what are the different records that are present. So see, as of now, we have like 5 records, like with ID 1, ID 2, ID 3, ID 4, ID 5. Let's say we want to modify this particular record and see, we want to modify the age of Sally. The age is currently 24. Let's say we want to make it as 26 and the ID is 6. So let's write down the let's provide the payload. So this would be a put method. So you have to select this REST API type from this drop down, select this put, and then try to like provide this API v1 slash employee, and then you need to provide the ID. So ID of Sally was 6, and now what we need to do, we need to provide the request body. So for providing the request body or the payload, what we do, we go ahead and try to click on this body, and then after that we click on this raw, and then we click on this JSON, and we'll try to provide the age in this JSON format. So we'll provide the age. So this is the key that we are going to modify age, and the value was existing value was 24. Let's make this as 26. So let's try to hit this API. So I'm getting a 200 response. So let's try to hit the REST API again, this particular REST API, and we'll try to like verify whether this particular record got updated. The age should now be reflecting as 26. So this is our fetch API, right? So from this fetch API, I can like verify what I have updated, whether that is reflecting or not. So let's try to verify this one. Okay, see this. This has updated, right? This age is updated for Sally. So this is what put API basically does. It modifies your existing record. Sorry, TJ, can you like clarify your question? What if the client don't want response one in Postman console for put method? Postman console. Response one. What do you mean by response one? No, this is nothing one. This is nothing like means this is not no this is not the response. This is not the response. It is simply something means this is not what client is this is not the output means it's simply like some line number that postman shows you. This is nothing. Ignore that thing. Means this is your line number. You see this, right? This is the line number. That is not response. Ignore that thing. This is the line number. Whenever you get the output, right, means there are different line numbers which shows this thing. Yeah, we can like provide some description as well. We can provide some description that this is updated, there's no issue in that. We can provide the description as well. For that, we'll have to create some DTO objects. So we'll see that in validation and like exception handling. Let's say what we want to do, we'll see some things like some description while performing the validations and exception handling. Like, let's say your API, you are hitting an API it and you got some issues. For now we are just showing the status code as 200. Let's say means it's like more evident in error scenarios, like let's say your API is not providing you proper response, and in that case what you want to do, you want to like show some kind of error response, means the client should be able to read from that API response that what is the error that you are facing. So we'll see that thing. Let's say we will try to see those validations and how you basically go ahead with creating the API error codes or error responses. So we'll see those things and we'll write down some validations as well for our project. So let's try to write down some validations. Yeah, TJ, we'll cover that. We'll try to like show some API error response as well, and that will be like custom, means whatever you want to show. We'll take down some examples when we start to write down the validations. So everyone understood this put API? Anyone who has issues in this can ask now. Okay, fine. So let's try to write down some validations. And for writing down the validations, let's say when I now there is some constraint by the business, that the business has set some requirements that you cannot enroll an employee into the organization if the employee's age is below 18 years. Means that person to be an employee, to be enrolled in the organization, you have, that person has to be basically at least of 18 years of age. So how do you validate that thing? We'll see how we can validate thing. So we will modify this, we will modify this API like our post API. So we'll see how we can modify this API. We want to put some validation in this. As of now, if you like provide any age, even if you like provide the age as 0, age as 1, age as 2, means it's like fine, it your employee is getting registered, but there has to be some constraints, right? Let's try to put those constraints and those validations now. We'll see how you can validate the data that you are getting from the client. Means the client can enter some wrong data as well, right? But you have to validate that data. Only if the data is valid, you can go ahead with creating your REST APIs. So let's try to create a package where we will write down our validator. We will write down a validator class. Let's term this package as validator. And what we'll do is we will go to this validator package and we will create our class. Let's name these classes validator class, and we will write down some methods here for validating the employee's age. So let's say, okay, one more thing. This validator class has to be injected into our controller layer. See, in the controller layer, we get the input from the client. So we can validate this data here itself before passing it to the service layer, such that we can throw any exception. we can throw any response or exception if the data is not valid. So let's make this class as a component so that it can be injected. So if your class has to be identified as a bean which can be injected into the class, what you can do, you can use this annotation like at the rate component. So as soon as we use this at the rate component, this this class in the application context is considered as a Spring Bean, okay, which can be injected into the other classes. Now we'll write down some methods for validation. So let's write down some method. Let's write down a method for validating the age. So public boolean validate age, and what we can do, we can take something like integer age, and what we can do, we can return a boolean value if the age is 18 or greater than 18. Means in that case we are fine, we can go ahead and create the resource, we can like enroll that employee in the organization. So let's write down if age is greater than 18 or greater than equal to 18, we are fine, and we will return true. But if the age is like less than 18, so what we want to do, we want to show the client that this is a bad request, you need to provide proper request. Means this is bad data, you need to provide a proper request. Means the age should be at least like 18 years or above. So we will now see how we create that error response to the client. Means the client should be able to see that error response, and the client has to know that this is not a valid data that I am sending, I need to like modify my data. So we will show exactly like we'll show exactly like what error response we need to throw. So we will throw an exception if the age is less than 18 years, and we will write down our own custom exceptions. So let's write down this new, we will create our own custom exception such that we are able to pass some meaningful message. So let's write down some invalid input exception. We have not created this exception as of now. We will create it now. So if you remember the class of exception handling in core Java, I have taught you how to create like your custom exception class, means user defined exception classes. So see, Java already provides many runtime exceptions and many compile time exceptions like input output exception, SQL exception, your file not found exception. These are the examples of like inbuilt Java provided exceptions. But if you want to write any custom exceptions, like while you build your project, right, there will be a lot of scenarios where you have to basically build your own exception handling mechanism. So what we'll try to do is I am trying to create my own custom exception, and let's say I have to pass some message to the client that employee has to be of minimum, employee has to be of minimum 18 years to enroll in the organization, minimum 18 years to be enrolled in the organization. So we will this error response has to be shown to the client, and the client also has to get some uh, error code. We will send some error code as well to the client. So if we want to like create this exception, what we need to do is we need to create an exception class, our own user defined custom exception class, which we'll do for now. And we will place all these custom exception classes in a new package. Let's name these packages exception. So see, these are some kind of like standard naming conventions that you do for each layer. For controller, you will write down this controller package. For data layer, you can write down this DAW. Within DAW, if you have your implementation class, you can keep those classes in this IMPL sub package. And your all the data transfer objects are in this GTO. Your exception classes are in this exception. Then the class that you are writing for mapping the database records to the data transfer object, that you can keep in mapper. In service layer, in service package, you basically write down the business logic. In validator, you will be writing the code for validating. So let's try to create this invalid input exception class. Okay, so I'll go ahead and try to create a new class, invalid input exception, and we'll see how we can create this invalid input exception. So to create this invalid input exception, this class must be a child of the exception class. If you remember, when we created our own custom exception class in core Java, we went ahead with extending the exception. So now what we want to do is we want to accept this message, right? This message must be accepted by this class. When we create the object, this is like, if you like write down something like this, new invalid input exception, and pass this message, that means it is calling the constructor, right? It is calling the constructor of that particular class. And that that constructor basically has some string field, string variable, which will be accepting this message. So what we need to do is we need to create a, let's try to create a instance variable for accepting that message, and we will go ahead and try to generate this constructor. We will generate this constructor. So public invalid, okay, I don't want to things. Why is so public invalid input exception, and this accepts a string message. And see, since this is extending the exception parent, what we want to do in exception class, right? In this exception class, there is a method already defined for handling the exception, and that accepts a string type of parameter. So what we can do is we can pass this message to the we can pass this message to the parent class, that is our exception class. So okay, what is the issue? Okay, okay, got it. So this is our invalid input exception class. We have created our custom exception class. This is extending the parent exception class, and this is accepting a parameter which will be used for showing the exceptions. This will accept the message which we are passing from the validator. It is giving me that I need to import this class. Let's import this class. Okay, okay, once you import this class, right, see now what error you are getting, that you have to add exception to method signature. either you can do two things. Whenever you throw any exception, what you can do, you can either like provide this in the method description, like invalid input exception throws invalid input exception, or what you can do, you can write down the try and catch block, which we have already seen where we were using the exception handling in the classes. So let's try to like use this um, throws in the method signature is itself throws invalid input exception. So what we'll do now is our invalid input exception, the error has gone. It was throwing error because we had some error related to this class in some other class, so that was throwing the error. Now this error has gone away. But see, for us to like show this message in the form of a error response, we need to do some more things. We need to create one error response object which will show some kind of like status code as well, which will show some kind of status code as well. We need to like show the status code and the error response. So we'll do some more things. We will have to create one error response object. So this error response object will be shown to the client, means we'll be showing one message and we will be showing one status code as well, like 200 is for okay, 400 is for bad request. So we'll show the error response as well. So let's name this class as error response, and we will keep it in the exception package itself because this is related to our exceptions, means we are throwing some error response in case of exceptions, so we'll keep it in this exceptions package itself. And now what we need to do is we'll keep we'll build out our error response object. So we will need the status code to be shown to the client. So let's take this as an integer and we will need to show some message. So let's keep this as a string message. And what we need to do is we need to generate a constructor, and we will generate one constructor, and we will only keep the message because we need to show the message to the client, and status code will be shown in the as part of the response. So let's select this message, and what we'll do is let's try to use the annotations. So see, there's one more annotation like at the rate data. If you use this annotation, right, this is a Lombok annotation. So if you use these annotations, it like generates your setters, getters, all those methods it will generate for you. So this is like another annotation. And let's try to use this no args constructor. This is for default constructor. And then this all args constructor. This is for parameterized constructor. So this is our error response object. This is our error response object. Now see, this is a exception handling mechanism that you can use at any layer. I'm trying to build that exception handling mechanism which you can throw it at validation layer, which you can throw at any data layer as well or at service layer as well. So try to like focus on this thing because this is one of the most important things. And when you want to like throw some exceptions or some errors at any layer, you will be needing this. And once you understand one of the exception handling mechanisms, it will be like bread and butter for you, it will be like very easy for you like to create those things. But try to like understand one of the examples and then it will be very easy for you. So we are building one error response object here, and I'm keeping two fields, status code and message here. Now what I want to do is, like Spring Boot provides us with some global exception handling mechanism. So how you are basically going to handle any exception throughout your project. So there are some annotations that you have to basically write. So we will create one class for handling the exception globally, and that let's name that class as global exception handler. So I will show you the usage of some annotations. So this is our global exception handler class. So there's one annotation like controller advice. If you use that annotation, what it does is it allows you to handle the exceptions globally within the project. So that annotation will use it here. We'll see how you can basically try to handle the exceptions globally at any layer. So that annotation at the rate controller advice needs to be put at the class level. See, there are some annotations that we'll be using and that will basically like work internally to like build the things. But if you like understand one of the exception handling mechanisms, it will be like very easy for you to write down your own custom exceptions. You cannot always rely on Java exceptions. Means there are like few exceptions the runtime exceptions and compile time, but your client or the business will definitely ask you in the requirement that if I am sending some bad request, I need to see this particular proper message itself. So there will be some requirement from the client that I need to exactly see this message on the browser, that minimum age of the employee should be this much. Means that client can be naive, right? Client can like enter any information. So but you have to like handle those particular things at the code, at your validation layer. You need to handle those things, and for validations you need to like write down proper exception handling as well. So let's try to build our exception handling method. So we have to for this requirement we have to send one error response that minimum age of the employee must be 18 years, and we have to send a bad request as well, that this is not a proper request. So we will like create one method, public, and we need to send some response as well. So let's say public response body, and to utilize this, the return type of this method will be the error response that we created just now. So let's send the error response as the return output, and let's name this class as handle exception, and we'll need to pass the type of exception that we want to throw. So we have created our custom exception, right? Invalid input exception. Invalid input exception must be passed here. So let's try to pass, and our return type is error response. Our return type is basically error response. So in order to send our error response, what we need to do is we need to create an object of the error response, and error response required two fields, right? It requires basically two fields. So we will send, let's say, http status code as bad request, and we will send the bad request dot value. So let's say, see, this is our status code, and it provides a dot value such that you can like pass the value in the form of the response. So you can utilize this for all the responses, right? If you want to like pass some other thing like conflict, we'll see this example as well, like what is the case of conflict. So you can like pass the value as well. So it has different methods. So for now we will pass a bad request, and we can pass the exception message as well. Ex dot get message, we need to pass the message as well, right? In the error response we have created our instance variable for passing the message, so we'll pass this message as well. Now we have created our method, but how does Spring Boot know that this is our exception method? So for that we will have to use one annotation. If you use this exception handler annotation, the Spring Boot automatically knows that this handle exception method is basically like for handling your exceptions, and it can handle your exception globally. And see what we need to like send the status as well. So for that there is another annotation. See, it's all the game of annotations now. You'll have to write less code and a lot of annotations. So there's something like response status. So in the response status, what you want to send is a bad request. So let's send this bad request. So now I think this method is created. If you want to like write down any other methods, any other error handling mechanism, you can like write the same thing here, and you can just change the exception type here and the status code here. We'll see if you like are able to build this exception, the rest of the exceptions, right, it will be like very easy. So let's see how much we have written. Okay, our error response object is created, which requires status code and the message, and our global exception handler class is created, and our custom exception is as well created, and in the validator we have written this method as well. So let's see, we will now validate in the controller layer. We'll go to our controller layer and we'll validate certain things. We'll validate the age of the uh, employee to be enrolled. So let's go to our controller layer. So this is our employee controller, and we needed to validate before creating uh, this before enrolling this employee, right? We need to validate the error, sorry, validate the employee age. So for using this validator, we need to inject this in the uh, employee controller. Let's try to inject that particular validator here. So how do we do that? You use the auto-wide annotation, and you need to create the validator. So public validator, let's provide some instance variable name, and now you can use the methods what you have created in the validator class. So see, this is one of the most important things, like validations along with exception handling. This is one of the most important things. So try to focus on this. So let's try to validate the employee age. See, now that method is already available to you. Why? Because you have injected that particular spring bean here, spring component here, right? So you have injected that particular bean. Now let's see what you can do. You have to validate the age. So you will get it from the request body, employee dot get age, and that's it. Now you can see that you are getting some error. So what it is trying to say is you need to add some exception to your method signature. So see what happens. This method has thrown some exception, and that this exception is now going to your controller method. Means this is called exception delegation. Whatever exception you got in validator, your validator was called from your controller method, right? So whatever exception validator is sending, now it has gone to your parent, means whatever class has called it. So it has gone to this particular method because the validator method was getting called from here, and we are expecting an exception. So we will have to handle this, and we'll need to, how we can handle this is we'll need to handle add the theme, add the same throws invalid input exception in the method level. So let's try to add this to the method signature. I think we should be good. Throws invalid input exception. Now let's try to go ahead and try to create a new, try to uh, create a new employee in the organization. Let's try to restart our server. So our employee management application is started now, and what we'll do is we will try to create the employee. Let's say I'm passing some ID here, and I am passing the age. Let's say I'm passing the age as 10. In this case, we should be expecting some kind of error response that the employee must be of minimum 18 years of age. That error response is required to be shown to the client. So let's try to hit this. See, you're getting the error response now, right? You're getting the status code, which is 400, and you're getting the message that employee has to be of minimum 18 years to be enrolled in the organization. So this is how you send proper responses as well. Means you had seen the get responses like the 200 response, that was like, that was like expected response, right? Means that was the expected response in case of if everything went fine. But in case of any failure, in case you want to show any error response, what you need to do is you need to build your exception handling, and you need to bind your error response along with the proper exception handling status code and status message. Now if the employee sees this, right, if the employee sees this, the employee exactly knows that what error he has done, what is the missing thing that he needs to fix in this particular payload. The error response is quite clear, and what you can do, let's try to fix this. Now if you send proper response, like sorry, if you send proper payload, if you give the correct age, I think we should be good to enroll the employee. See, now this employee is created. Now again, let's try to create another employee with age less than 7, age less than 18. Let's name this as Matthew. See, we are again getting that error response. So this was what I wanted to explain to you. In case of like validation error, you need to show proper error response to the client such that the client is now aware that this is the thing that the client needs to fix in the payload. Now we'll see one more exception validation that you can like try to fix. Let's say for now what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to create an employee with the same let's say I'm passing the same ID again. I'm trying to pass the same ID again, and I'm trying to create the same record. So in that case, if the employee is already enrolled in the organization, you should be like forbidding that thing again, right? Means, just in case if the employee is already enrolled in the organization, you should not be recreating that, right? So what we can do is we can try to like forbid that thing. And let's say we want to provide some validation around that. Means, if an employee is already enrolled in the organization, you should not re-enroll it. Means, this is also one of the requirements from the business. Means, if there's an employee which has been already enrolled, you do not need to like enroll the client. If that client goes ahead and tries to like re-enroll that employee, what error that client should get is that customer already exists. You should not try to enroll that customer. So what you can do to set this up? So we will try to create another exception which we will throw in case of like enrolling a duplicate employee. So see, now we need to like verify from the data layer as well, right? If our employee is already there or not. So we will write down a query to verify if the employee is already there. If the employee is already there, then we need to throw some exception. So we will try to throw that exception. So let's try to write down one method in the data layer where we will check if the employee is already existing. So let's try to create one method which will return me a true or false based on if the employee is existing. If the employee is already existing, then we want a true value, and if the employee does not exist in the organization, then we are fine. It returns a false value, and then we go ahead and try to like create that employee. So boolean employee exists, and let's say we pass the ID here, and if you pass the ID means we will fetch the I- ID. We'll try to like fetch the record from the database and verify if that ID is already existing. So let's try to write down some queries in the database to verify if the employee is already existing. Now we have created the method signature in our employee DAO. We need to basically go ahead and implement that method. So let's try to implement this method. So our method signature is ready, and what we'll do is we will try to implement this. So let's write down the query. Let's write down a simple query, and we can like utilize the same query that we have written here. We have written one select query, right? Select ID name age from employee where ID is equal to this, and we can like utilize the same thing, fetch employee by ID. Means what we are trying to do, we are trying to like fetch from the database if our record is already existing. So we can fetch with the help of ID. So we have seen this thing, right? Fetch employee by ID. So we are using the same thing. So I'll copy paste this code. So now what I can do, see, this will return me an employee object or it will not return me an employee object. There are two cases. If the record exists, it will return me an employee object. If the record does not exist, then this object will be null. So let's see this. If employee not equal to null, I'm making some check condition. If employee not equal to null, that means the employee is already existing. So what we can do is return true. And if the employee is existing, sorry, if the employee is not existing, then we can return a false. And also one thing, like when an employee is not existing in the database and you are trying to query for that particular employee, means then the database will throw you some exception that data does not exist. So there is some class in Java to handle that particular exception, and that exception is data access exception. So that basically handles that particular exception. So what you can try to do is try to wrap this particular piece of code in your uh, try block, and in the catch block there, if you write a try block you will have to write a catch block. So what you can do is you can try to have this data access exception, and you can try to print some stack trace, e dot print stack trace. Now we have we have created a method for checking if the employee is already existing. And what you can do is you can go ahead in your employee controller, and you can try to, or what we can do is basically we can try to go ahead in the service layer. We'll go to the service layer, employee service IMPL, and what we can check here is if the employee is already existing. So let's say we are trying to register one employee or save one employee. So before doing that, what we'll just check, we will make a check that if the employee is already existing, we need not create that employee. We need not create that record again, because that will be a duplicate record. So what we can do is if employee dot employee exists, and what we can do, we can like pass the employee ID here, get ID. So we need to throw some kind of exception, and what we can do is we can throw some kind of exception. Let's say we name this exception as customer already exists, customer already exists exception. So this is again one of the user defined exceptions, and this is another validation scenario. And what you need to like, let's say we pass some meaningful messages here, like customer already exists. So but as of now we do not have this exception created, right? We do not have this exception created, so we'll have to go ahead and try to create this exception. So where do we exactly go ahead and try to create the exception? We'll go to the exception package, and in this exception package we will again do the same thing what we have done for the previous example. Like we wrote one invalid input exception, right? So similarly we will create one more exception, and it will be exactly same. This you will have to write down the exact same thing here as well. So we'll go ahead and try to create one string message which we will pass, and what next we will do is we'll write down our parameterized constructor which takes a parameter as message, and we are doing the same thing again. So let's initialize this dot message equal to message, and super, we need to pass this message to the parent constructor. See, this invalid input exception and this customer already exists exception, it's exactly the same. So that is why I'm telling you now the exception handling, all the scenarios will be similar. If you want to handle any exception, this you need to like create one user defined exception, and you need to again add some logic to your global exception handler. Now you have like created one method for handling the bad request. Now see, if this employee is already existing in the database, it is not a bad request. It is a case of conflict. Conflict means duplicate record. So you will need to create another method. Now see, what are the things you need to change? Just copy paste this thing and paste it here. Now you need to change this thing, like the bad request must be changed to conflict, and here what you need to change, you need to change it from invalid input exception to customer already exists exception. And okay, and from this bad request you need to change it to conflict dot value. Okay, what error I'm getting here? Why is this an error? Customer invalid input super string message. What am I missing here? Okay. Um, okay, one more thing. In employee service IMPL, I need to import this. Oh, 1 second. Okay, we need to like pass this. We need to handle this exception here as well, right? Employee, sorry, customer already exists exception. Okay, now we have done with this. Now let's see this. Okay, let me try to just copy paste this in case I did some typo or something. I have some issue in my register employee service layer. Through new customer already exists exception. Customer already exists. I think we should be good here. Extends throwable. Oh god. I think I'm missing something. I have not extended the exception here. My bad. Have not extended the exception. Okay. Now it should be fine. Extract get message, and what error I'm getting here? Okay, throw new throws, add exception to the method signature. So I have added that exception to the method signature. Means we have seen this, right? Whenever you throw any exception, you have to either handle that using your try catch block, or you can handle that particular exception using this method signature. Now let me try to see if all the things are fixed. Now what extra did we do? We created a similar user defined exception like the invalid input exception. We created a customer already exists exception, and in the global exception handler you added one method, and what you did, you just changed the status code, and you change the error response values. Like now you need to send a conflict value, and you need to send the new user defined exception that you have created. So let's try to see if you are once you try to create a duplicate record, whether you're getting that error or not. So okay, see, we are getting some error again, that we need to again add this exception to the method signature. So let's try to add this to the method signature. Now we have added the exception to our register method as well. We have added this customer already exists exception to the register method. Let's try to run our application. Okay, our application has started, and now what we want to do is, let's try to pass some valid record. Let's try to pass some age 25, and see, this ID already exists in the database, right? This ID already exists. So let me try to hit the API. If this record already exists in the database in our organization, if this employee already exists, so it should throw me an error, right? Customer already exists. So okay, why did it get created? There must be some issue in the code then. 48. Okay, there is definitely some issue in the code. Okay. mm, Employee service dot register employee. If employee dot employee exists, employee dot get ID through new customer already exists exception. Okay, employee dot save. Fetch employee by ID and employee exists. I think I'm doing it right. What is the thing that I'm missing? Select ID, name, age from employee where ID is equal to this. Okay, if employee not null, return true. Okay, otherwise return false. That is correct. Select ID, name, age from employee where ID is equal to this. JDBC template dot query for object query new employee mapper and then the ID. How come this ID got created again? Okay, okay. I think I created it for the first time itself, that particular ID. Now let's see. Let's hit our API once again. See, this ID 8 is already present, ID 7 is present, 6 is present. Let's try to create this record 7 Sally and 25. Let's try to create this 7 Sally and 25. Now I'm expecting that I get this error response again. 409 and customer already exists. C. Again, I'm getting this error response. So this is another validation scenario where the status code is 409 and this is a scenario of conflict that the customer already exists. So if the client now sees this error scenario, if he sees this error response, the client will understand that this customer is already existing. I need to modify my payload. So did you all understand these validation scenarios or not? If you have any questions, you can ask these questions right now. So what we have done for handling the validations and exceptions, we have written one validator for handling the client exceptions at the input layer, that is the controller layer itself. Whatever data that the client is passing, if there is any data with that, if there is any issue with that particular data, you can throw the exception at the controller layer itself. And for that I have marked this class, validator class, as a component, and I have injected this particular class in the I've injected this Spring Bean in the employee controller, and I have utilized it for validating the age of the employee. In case the validation fails, I have created one user defined exception, that is the invalid input exception, and I have one string message which should be shown to the user in case of any error. And for handling the error response like this in the API, what we need to do is we need to create one error response object which takes two things like the status code and the message. So this is exactly what error response object is being shown here, right? This error response object is being shown to the client. This is the status code and this is the message. And for understanding that how your Spring Boot would understand that the error response is basically an exception method. So for that you will have to create one control global exception handler class, and you have to make this class as controller advice such that Spring Boot knows that now this is the class which is used for handling the exceptions globally. And in your handle exception method, you need to use two annotations. One is the exception handler annotation and the response status. So if you want to like send something like 400 bad request, you can send it like with the help of this bad request status code, and you need to send the exception what you have created right away. Means you have created this invalid input exception, right? So you need to pass it here, and you need to create the proper error response object such that that can be seen in the error response. So this way we have covered validations in your Spring Boot project, and also we have seen how we can handle the exceptions. So this exception handling at any layer should be easy for you. You can try out by creating new scenarios and adding it to your project as well. You can try to like think of any new scenarios. Let's say uh, means you want to like provide some validation that the ID that you are sending to the payload must be like, let's say, below 100. You can provide some validation to that. You can write your own custom exceptions, custom validations, and you can try to validate those data. So I'll keep this class content until today. We'll conclude the class. If you have any questions, you can ask. Otherwise, we are done for today. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, everyone.